So we've been looking at how we can read and surf the curves of growth, the push and pull of efficiency and complexity, and how activity, value and effort are rarely distributed in a fair and even manner. Beneath much of business, economics and technology sit recurring structural patterns, curves, distributions and constraints that appear again and again across nature, physics, networks and human behaviour. Difficult to ignore, like much of science and its laws, the maths behind these patterns is hard to break or to work against. And while last week we focused on an uneven and unfair distribution, we are, if we are focused, able to leverage the shape of reality in our favour. And so this week I shall look at judgment and excellence and how we can make one lead to the other. This is part 4 of the series, Misreading the Shape of Reality, where we examine the hidden structures shaping business growth and human systems. At this point, a natural question emerges. If value is concentrated and the effort eventually is diluted, how do I decide where to focus? This is where measurement enters, and with it, a new layer of distortion. Charles Goodhart observed that when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a really good measure. Now, before I continue, I'll just say data is golden. However, metrics serve as useful proxies. They help us navigate complexity, track progress, and make decisions with a degree of objectivity at first. Then, over time, something shifts. We can begin to optimize for the metric itself rather than the underlying outcome it should represent. Consider a simple social media pathway. Impressions lead to connections, which lead to conversations, which lead to revenue. At first, tracking impressions provides useful sense of activity at the top of the funnel. Over time, however, the temptation is to increase impressions as a direct route to growth. More content equals more reach equals more visibility. Impressions in isolation do not create any value whatsoever. There are a few steps removed from the outcome, and if focus shifts towards maximizing them, the quality of the connections may well decline, the relevance of conversations can weaken, and the relationship to revenue becomes less reliable. But impressions are up. The metric has improved, the system has not. In more extreme cases, the distortion becomes structural. All over we come across incentives that are aligned to activity rather than to outcome. Take the classic letting agent model. Here, the system rewards volume over quality. The agent is paid commission for every contractor call-out. Work that doesn't actually solve the maintenance issue for the client is in the interest of the letting agent while working against their client. Or take an investment appraisal. It's adjusted in a decision to make it satisfy the measurement rather than the objective, to make it work. The team has focused on hitting the targets that, while technically achieved, do little to advance the business and actually might well break it. These are obvious when viewed from a distance, but less so when embedded within your own operation. And this is precisely why they endure. Now, returning once more to our founder, the issue begins to clarify. The garden design business had not failed to generate activity, quite the opposite. But activity had become diffuse and effort was spread across too many options, too many conversations, and in too many directions. The system was busy, but it was no longer effective. Sales conversations used to be informal, but they were highly relational and filled with trust. As the company grew, however, the process became broader and less guided. Customers were presented with increasing numbers of choices and expected to navigate them, largely alone. The pathway to decision became slower, heavier, and less certain. The small number of actions that actually drove outcomes had been diluted by a larger set that did not. It all took a lot of effort, and value was not being realised. The founder told me they wanted to understand how their role needed to change. So we started with data. The data was there. For the garden design and build outfit, across 27 flooring choices, just 5 represented more than 80% of actual selections. Plus, other than 2 of those, each of the 5 served a rather different purpose in terms of flooring. So I asked, why is the customer being presented all 27 equally? And across almost every category, a similar pattern emerged. I never really decided whether price or Pareto was responsible. That wasn't the point. But one or the other was waving their magic wand. How to make the customer choices easier became a fairly simple exercise. They settled on a few palettes with a slider variation chooser, making the whole process very smooth, pleasant, and fast for the customer. The eventual solution was not removing choice entirely, but it was structuring it intentionally and actually intelligently. While our case study deals with customer choices, it presents the uncomfortable truth that most of what you do does not matter as much as you think it does. A small number of actions, decisions, and people drive the majority of outcomes. The rest, while not irrelevant, contribute far less than their presence suggests. There are 100 mineral waters. Fun to guess which ones are safe to drink. Until this imbalance is recognised, the natural response is just to do more, to improve everything, to optimise across the board, and in doing so, to miss the very leverage that would have made the difference in the first place. A different approach begins with a different question. Not how do I improve everything, but where is the leverage? Where are the few points in the system where effort translates most directly into outcome? Where does a small improvement create a disproportionate effect? You can't get what you want until you know what you want. In systems governed by these uneven distributions, progress can be made disproportionately once the evidence starts to flow. We don't do it through uniform improvement, we do it through focused amplification. There is a temptation to resist this idea, especially when it comes to our staff. It challenges notions of fairness, balance, and even effort itself. It suggests that some work matters more, some people contribute more, some decisions carry more weight. This is not a moral statement. It's a structural one. Nature does not distribute evenly, it concentrates. And in business, as in nature, the goal is not to make everything better. It's to recognise what matters and make that bit exceptional. Now in part 5 next week, the game and its networks, we step beyond the business itself, because even with an understanding of curves and concentration, one final layer does remain. No system operates alone. Value, growth, and limitation are all shaped by something larger, the network you sit within, and the constraints you cannot escape, no matter how hard you might try to. So this week's musical eggs, we had Golden, the song Golden by Cory Wong. I chose this time, we've been talking about the garden design and build business for so long, so The Garden is a song by Pearl Jam. You could also actually take Guns N' Roses, I think did a really good version, actually different song. 100 Mineral Waters, fun to guess which ones are safe to drink, is the lyric from the song It's All Too Much by Joe Jackson. And You Can't Get What You Want Till You Know What You Want is another song by Joe Jackson. Thank you very much. Don't forget to hit like, hit subscribe, and come back next week for more of me rattling on about curves and patterns in business.